What is up, Wizards? Dev, SBMTG, we like it, a magic, all that. Feels good to be back on the couch, just doing like a normal video. Been doing really wacky stuff lately. Check that out if you haven't seen it yet. But today's a good one. I get to just chill with you guys on the couch again for a solid one and talk about something really exciting, because today was the first day of Brothers War preview season. We got to see a ton of like legends whose names you'll probably recognize, and some of those cards look really good. But we also got to see new mechanics and some nice solid role players and stuff. So let's go ahead and get into it, because there's a ton of stuff to cover on the first day. We might as well start off with this one. Go ahead and get it out of the way. Wizards confirmed that the Pain lands are the main lands in the set. There you go. And that the Brothers War has the other four. Bars already did. I just woke up. But anyway, all of these are going to be hugely beneficial to like multiple decks in Standard, right? You got Lawn of War Waste, Underground River, Brushland, and Battlefield Forge. Nailed it. I've been playing with the cards my whole life. I should know by now. But these are going to be important to lots of stuff, whether it's the Esper decks that play a lot of like creatures in the early game nowadays, and they need untapped lands too to play 3 colors and actually play creatures on curve. Same thing goes with like green, white, and especially Naya, like aggro and tokens decks especially, right? Because they need to play, early drops. They need to play 1-drops not only on turn 1, but on turn 3 they need to go like 2-drop, 1-drop, double spell. And they just don't really have a whole lot of ability to do that right now. So he's going to help with that, right? Just all kinds of stuff. Boros aggro, obligatory Boros aggro plug. They finally got Battlefield Forge. So maybe they'll return to their former glory of last year. There's just all kinds of decks that could really dig having these Pain lands. So it's just good that we have the whole Tenfecta, is that a word? In Standard now. Would it actually be Decafecta? I don't know. I'm not smart. But anyway, let's move on, because there have to be cards that we talk about first. Like, I guess the Pain lands don't count. They're almost an honorable mention, but at this point, you know how I do. We try to go from like in ascending order, or is it descending order? I'm not smart, but either way, we try to go from like kind of the cards of the day all the way up to the best cards of the day. And again, some cards have to be first. So, with that in mind, let's take a look at 2 artifacts that at least have the Unearth ability on them. So, hey, Unearth in this says pretty good. It's a good ability. I like Unearth. So let's take a look at these 2 real quick. We got Scrapwork Cohort and Ashnod's Harvester. Now, Scrapwork Cohort, I've always had a hard time saying this word, is 4 mana for a 5/3 artifact creature. It's a soldier. And when it enters the battlefield, you create a 1/1 colorless soldier artifact creature token, and you can unearth this for 2 and a white. So 4 mana 5/3 that actually gets you 6/4 worth of stats, and then you unearth it and it gets you another 6/4 worth of stats. So you get to keep the tokens even when this thing dies. After it unearths, you get to keep the tokens. So it's not terrible, but it's kind of a lot of mana, so I'm not too sure about it. Juggernaut stats don't really work in 2022, so I'm not too sure. But Ashnod's Harvester is 2 mana. This is a 3/1. It's an artifact creature. It's a construct. And whenever it attacks, you exile a card from a graveyard. You can also unearth this for its casting cost. It's 1 and a black. You have to pay actual mana of a color now, but still 2 mana to unearth this, not too bad, right? A 2 mana 3/1 is not the best thing in the world in 2022. They tend to die fairly easily, although I will say this, 2 mana 3/1's just got a little bit better considering Meathook Massacre got banned. So there is that, but there's a number of like black 2 mana 3/1s in the format. What makes this better than Blade of the Oni, right? Well, Blade of the Oni can just die on blocks, trade with like another 2-drop or even a 1-drop some of the time. And that's not, well, I guess Blade of the Oni has Menace. You don't have to worry about that happening so often, but with Harvester, it can die in combat, trade with a smaller creature or something, and then just come back. It only comes back the one time, but whatever. Maybe you just need to bolt your opponent or swing in when they're at a low life total, or force them to block, and get that reanimation target, that card with flashback, whatever, out of their graveyard. There's a lot of messing around in graveyards nowadays, so I could actually see this attacks ability being really relevant some of the times. Not bad. I mean, we already see this exact attacks trigger being pretty relevant on Graveyard Trespasser. And even without the drain involved with the Graveyard Trespasser, I think this is still pretty sweet, especially if you have this and Trespasser in the same deck, and just no one can ever do anything in their yard. So it's a sweet little 2-drop. Not sure it quite makes it there for Standard play, but it could, considering that, Mono Black Aggro wants to just attack. And the fact that this can die in combat, you don't really care, just bring it back. It only gets to swing the one time, but who cares? It's an extra bolt's worth of damage, and aggro cares about that a lot. Let's move to a card that I'm not as impressed by as Ashnod's Harvester in a lot of ways. I don't think it's as utility, but I am intrigued by splitting the Power Stone. This is 3 mana, 2 and a blue for a sorcery. As an additional cost to cast the spell, sacrifice an artifact. Create 2 tapped Power Stone tokens. If the sacrificed artifact was legendary, draw a card. I don't know why splitting the Power Stone sounds like an analogy to me for something else. Like, what'd you do all day? You know, man, sat around splitting the Power Stone. You know, like, I don't know. It just sounds like an odd grouping of words that means something else. But the card itself is, like, not good. I was going to say it's not terrible, but the flip side of that is that it's also not a very good looking card to me. You have to have an artifact to sack to it, and you only get the full value if the artifact was legendary. So, you know, finally a use for Eater of Virtue, I guess. Or Luxior Giada's Gift, you know. I guess if you're playing a 2-drop artifact into this, it's Weatherlight Completed, but I don't want to sacrifice my Weatherlight Completed. I don't want to do that, but still, this could be okay. You know, this is blue ramp that ramps you by 2. So and draws you a card some of the time, but I think the spots this is going to see play in, if it ever sees play ever, I'm not sure that it will, but the spots that it could see play in are probably just sacking a token, you know? I'm not sure that you're going to draw a card value off of it all the time, but sometimes you're just going to sacrifice like a blood token, or it's going to feel weird, but a treasure token. So it's still technically ramping you, but you did lose ramp and color fixing, and this just gives you regular ramp and no color fixing. So, you know, you can debate stacking a treasure token to it, I think, but you could sacrifice a blood token or maybe even a clue token relatively easily to this and get like a pretty hellacious amount of ramp. I mean, you know, ramping by 2 on turn 3 in blue for some reason, like that's actually, I mean, I guess flavorfully for this set, it kind of makes sense, but still, ramping by 2 on turn 3 in blue is, I think, undeniably powerful, but having to enable it is a little harder. Now, it seems really weird for an Urza to be our 3rd card of the day, but that's where we are right now. Let's look at Urza, Power Stone Prodigy. This is 3 mana, 2 and a blue for a 1/3 legendary human artificer with vigilance. You can pay 1 for some reason, and tap it to draw a card and then discard a card. Whenever you discard 1 or more artifact cards, create a tapped Power Stone token. This ability triggers only once each turn. We've already seen a couple of Urzas, one today and another one before. And this is the weakest, I think, of the Urzas we'll get in the set, hopefully, unless we get like Urza, Baby Artificer. It's just like, oh, gaga, Urza. Anyway, won't go down that rabbit hole. What would a baby Urza be? Let me know in the comment section. Anyway, this one is, I'm not super impressed by. It's a loot ability. It's okay. So Merfolk Looter costs 2 mana. I hate to compare it to this. Merfolk Looter costs 2 mana. It taps to loot, to draw and discard. This costs 3 mana. It costs 50% more than a looter would normally cost. And you have to pay to use its ability, which is just booty. That's not good, man. It's not good. If you play it on turn 4, you can't even use it the turn it comes into play. It's a summoning sickness, but you play it on 3, and then on turn 4, you play a land, and look, you still only have 3 mana to spend if you actually want to use this thing's ability. I don't know, man. You got to play a bunch of artifacts in the deck to enable what exactly? Getting Power Stones? I don't know, man. I just wish. I don't know. I get that. This is the point I was trying to make earlier, and then I went off of it because I'm not very focused. I can see if they're trying to illustrate Urza at different stages of his power level here. Yeah, it makes sense, but it doesn't mean that this Urza had to be like kind of bad. It kind of is, let's be honest. Let's look at another Urza, and Commander players are going to be like, you're looking at this really early in the video, kid, but remember, we're mostly a standard channel, but I will acknowledge, Commander players. Let's look at Urza, Prince of Krug here. This is 4 mana, 2, a white and a blue for a 2/3 legendary human artificer. Artifact creatures you control get +2 ski, +2 ski Maruski. That's pretty good. And it also has a 6 mana. Create a token that's a copy of target artifact you control, except it's a 1/1 soldier creature in addition to its other types. Grand biscuits. It's just a fine card in Commander. Again, I'll just say that one more time in case you didn't hear me in the back. Copying artifacts in Commander is pretty silly. It doesn't even tap. So if you have like all the mana in the world, you can do it twice in a turn. It's just stupid. It's not like sorcery speed. You just do whatever you want to. God, it's crazy. It's so ridiculous. In Commander, we have like so many broken artifacts sitting around that you'd really like a second copy of. Matter of fact, if you have a second copy of them, you basically break the entire game. So that's, I imagine in Commander, this is just like banana pudding. But in Standard, I'm not too sure. I mean, what's your stat line? 4 mana, 2/3, a 4 mana guy that dies to cut down. Ooh, like imagine you think you're on top of the world. You swing in with like 3 artifact creatures that are all buff and big old artifact boys, and then your opponent just cuts 1 mana. They cut down your Urza and they block your guys. God, I just think you're cruising for a bruising on that one. You're just waiting in misery if you try to make this work in Standard. But I also assume that if you're trying to do like an artifact stack in Standard, you could do worse than a +2/+2 Anthem effect for all your guys. So, maybe people will try on this one in Standard, but I don't think this is a card for Standard. But up next, let's take a look at start looking at Mishra cards here. Mishra Excavation Prodigy. The Prodigy version of Mishra is also 3 mana. This one's 2 and a red for a 2/1 legendary human artificer with haste. Now, you also have to pay 1 for its ability, but it's a rummage. Pay 1, tap, discard a card, draw a card, so you flip it from the Urza one. Whenever you discard 1 or more artifact cards, add 2 red. This ability triggers only once each turn. Now this, I gotta say, I like a little bit more than the Urza one. I'm still not sure that it's playable. 3 mana, 2/1, it's not great. It does have haste. So if you're waiting till turn 4, you actually can use this thing's ability the turn it comes into play, and then immediately add 2 red. So there's a nice little play line. On turn 4, where you play Mishra, you go ahead and rummage with them, and then you like immediately get 2 red and play a Reckoner Bankbuster or something like that. Weatherlight Completed, something like that. So that's actually, I think, much better than Urza. I mean, just having haste is like much better than Vigilance, I think, in most cases. But of course, Mishra can't attack and use his ability in the same turn, so there's that. Urza can, but you're attacking with your 1/3. Good job. But Mishra, I'm not sure how much attacking with a 2/1 you're going to be doing on turn 4 anyway, especially when you could be getting mana out of its ability. And getting mana out of its ability is really good. I think it's just better than a Power Stone token. I think that maybe it illustrates some things flavorfully, right? Like Urza's more methodical and, over time he's more likely to win the greater war, whereas Mishra's more hot-headed and fast and hasty, and he'll get you the mana right now, but over time he won't have as much resources. I see what you're trying to do in terms of flavor, but in Standard, where, it's a game of turns, being quick matters in Standard, I'm still not sure this is fast enough for Standard, but the kind of little mana explosion that it can give you might be really important. So I'd be more surprised if people didn't try this in Standard than the Urza thing. But up next is Mishra, the Tamer of Macfawa. That's a funny combination of words, I can't lie to you. 5 mana, 3, a black, and a red for a 4/4 legendary human artificer. Permanents you control. Permanents you control have ward, sacrifice a permanent. It's a nasty line of text. Each artifact card in your graveyard has unearthed 1 black red. So this guy is gross. 5 mana is a lot. 5 mana is so much mana. But, a lot of times 5 mana is a lot for a guy because, your opponent can just kill it. But that's not necessarily true with Mishra. I mean, especially if you play it on curve. It just seems like a boss. If your opponent does have to Infernal Grasp it, they pay 2 life and sack a land, it's a pretty steep cost for dealing with, 5 mana 4/4. And it's not just him. Permanents you control. So you're protecting everything you have on the table, from other creatures to artifacts and enchantments and stuff and lands. And I think that's a huge deal too. Your opponent wants to deal with anything without a sweeper. Then now they have to, sacrificing permanents is ridiculous. that's pretty silly. And tacked onto that is a really important ability. Untapping with a Mishra on the table and just having 3 mana open. Oh, and by the way, you can, if you have 8 mana, you just happen to have 8 mana late in the game and you draw a Mishra on the top of your library, you can just unearth something that turn, which I think is also relevant. Going to be relevant in more than one game, a non-zero amount of games, you can unearth a Reckoner Bankbuster and draw a card if you're desperate. I mean, there are all kinds of little stuff you can do just in Standard alone with this, and I can't imagine that this doesn't at least try to get slotted into the Mardu Greasefang decks in Pioneer and Historic and stuff. So this just already has homes and just looks like a powerful card in a vacuum, regardless of what synergies it already has. So honestly, we're getting into the point where we're turning the corner and getting into some really strong cards from today, and this is definitely one of them. Now let's look at Gix. It's just so many names today. It's like a red carpet event. Gix, getting out of the limousine. Yawgmoth Praetor. Everyone tells me that you're supposed to pronounce this Praetor. I pronounced it Praetor since I was 11 years old. Apparently it's Praetor. That's going to take me some getting used to. But it's 3 mana, 1 and 2 black for a 3/3 legendary Phyrexian Praetor. And whenever a creature deals combat damage to one of your opponents, its controller may pay 1 life. If they do, draw a card. You can also pay 7 mana. That's 4 and 3 black. And also discard X cards, by the way. Exile the top X cards of target opponent's library. You may play lands and cast spells from among cards exiled this way without paying their mana costs. Well, this Gix, it's not for kids. This is a sweet little card right here, man. I mean, a 3-mana 3/3 is no longer a stat line that impresses me like ever. You got to do a lot more than just be a 3-mana 3/3, but luckily this does. I'm not sure how it stacks up to other 3-drops in standard, like Graveyard Trespasser. I got to bring that card up again. You know, Graveyard Trespasser is relatively hard to target. It's got the same stat line, but it's easier to cast. It's got drains on it. It can get bigger and do more drains if it's nighttime, and it just has an interesting effect on the game state in terms of, it can get cards out of graveyards and stuff. So Graveyard Trespasser just does, like, so much, like in terms of 3-drops, I think I'd compare this to something like a Florian. I think that's an interesting ground, but I think it's much better than Florian in a lot of cases. As a matter of fact, what I keep seeing people compare this to today is Toski. It's a 3-mana Toski that doesn't have Indestructible. And I think that's a nice way of looking at it. You drop this on turn 3, you get in with your 1 and 2 drops, you draw a couple of cards. Because if I'm not mistaken, it's worded that way. Whenever a creature, it's not one or more creatures. And so whenever a creature, so you can draw multiple cards in a turn off of this, which is kind of stupid. If you go 1-drop, 2-drop, 3-drop Gix, and you actually get in with both of the creatures you've already cast that game. Drawing 2 cards on 3 is just unbelievable. I think this card is probably at its best on turn 3 in an aggro deck. And in those cases, it's probably better than, say, a 3-drop like, Liliana or something like that. But I'm still not convinced that it's way better than a 3-drop like Graveyard Trespasser. Maybe you just play both. I don't know why you play 8 to 10 3-drops in an aggro deck. Play both, right? So you might even play more, depending. There's mono white decks from last season that cared about 3-drops, like 15 3-drops. So you never know. But still, Gix is a card that I think at least, again, people will try to play, but maybe be a little bit more successful than some of the other cards I've said about this video. Also, don't discount this last ability. If you have a way. This is something I keep seeing people on Reddit say is like, oh, but you're going to be out of cards by the time you have that much mana. Oh, well, it draws you cards. The card draws you cards. I keep seeing people say something to the effect of like, oh, you need a card draw and you need a refill in order to actually use this ability. It's like, have you read if you're reading the activated ability, then I'm pretty sure you've already read the first ability. But anyway, the card is its own refill. If you can get in for combat damage, but perhaps late in the game it's after a sweeper and you've cast Gix and you don't have any guides out and it's hard to, whatever. There's other ways of drawing cards. There's Reckoner Bank Busters and stuff like that. There's other ways of drawing cards and keeping your hand fresh. So there is that. You might be able to discard 2 or 3 cards late in the game and get some cards off the top of your opponent's deck. But don't forget that you can also just top deck poorly in the late game. There's going to be situations where you're at a stalemate. Everyone's got all the mana in the world. Everyone's just looking to draw the best card, just in that kind of sitch. And, you draw a land or something like that. You have the mana to pitch your land to a Gix and just see what your opponent's going to top deck and play that, So I think that's going to be relevant some of the time too. It's just a 3-drop that's good when dropped on turn 3 and has immediate impact on the game state. That's always good in standard. And 3-drop that has some relevance, some potential relevance at least later in the game too. And those are cards that I like. So Gix is pretty sweet. And I think that in terms of when we think of good, mono black aggro 3-drops, it's right up there on top of the format. But another 3-drop with a double mana cost, actually, that I really like, is Herkel. Herkel Master Wizard. It's 3 mana, 1 and 2 blue for a 2/4 legendary human wizard advisor. And at the beginning of your end step, if you've cast a non-creature spell this turn, reveal the top 5 cards of your library. For each card type among non-creature spells you've cast this turn, you may put a card of that type from among the revealed cards into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Now, I think Hurkyll could be really, really sweet when cast for effectively 4 mana, right? You go Herkel on turn 4, and then you Fading Hope like an opponent's thing, right? So that would be sweet, because then at the end of your turn, right, you look at the top 5, grab an instant. Sick. So, and especially later on in the game when you have enough mana to, play Herkel, Fading Hope a guy, and then grab Counterspell off the top and have the mana to play it, that also seems pretty ridiculous a lot of the time. So, or even grab like Impulse off the top. Seems good too. So, Hurkyll is sweet. I think this is an interesting deck building challenge that I usually don't think comes together greatly, but hey, you know, Tarmogoyf is proof otherwise. You know, these decks where you want to play a bunch of different card types. To juice the power level of this as much as possible. But I don't necessarily even think you have to build your deck that way. I think that some decks might just incidentally play, you know, 8 enchantments and 12 instants and 6 planeswalkers. You know what I mean? And like sometimes they'll get double value off of this. But if this ever only draws you one card, I think it's kind of fine. You know, it's not cut downable or anything. Yeah, it's not cut downable. It's not boltable, not lightning strikeable either for 3 mana. So altogether, I think this is actually a fairly strong card, but do the control decks that want, you know, a dig like this to important instants and sorceries and stuff. Do those decks have room for a card like this on 3? I'm not too sure. But still, I think, again, if this only ever draws you one card and it's like the best of your top 5, it's probably done a lot of work just in that one action alone. So I like this card. But up next, we've made it here. Let's look at Argoth, the Sanctum of Nature. This is a land, and it enters the battlefield tapped unless you control a legendary green creature. You can tap this for a green, and then you can also tap this 2 and 2 green and tap, create a 2/2 green bear creature token, then mill 3 cards. Activate only as a sorcery. Now you notice that my face isn't on screen, sorry about that, but I show you this card so I can show you the next card. But I do want to stop for just a second and talk about this because it's not the worst thing in the world, you know. It's kind of like a Vitu-Ghazi, I think it's called. It's not a Keldor Outpost, but it's more like a Vitu-Ghazi, you know, pay 4 mana, get a guy. And get a 2/2 for 4 mana is not terrible, especially in long grindy games. I think I'd be more than happy to tap this in the late game against control and stuff. Not quite a creature land, but in some cases, better than a creature land. So I think it's actually kind of neat just in that. I like lands that tap to make creatures. Sucker for those, but I show you this so I can show you Titania, Voice of Gaia. This is 3 mana, 1 and 2 green for a 3/4 legendary elemental with reach. Whenever 1 or more land cards are put into your graveyard from anywhere, you gain 2 life. At the beginning of your upkeep, if there are 4 or more land cards in your graveyard and you both own and control Titania and a land named Argoth, Sanctum of Nature, exile both of them, meld them into Titania, Gaia Incarnate. So that's probably pretty good. But let's talk about Titania, Voice of Gaia, for just a second. All I'm going to say here is that a 3 mana 3/4 keyword ability is not like the best, most playable stat line ever. But I do think the thing is cool and relatively easy to flip, easier than you might think. I mean, we got these new Capenna lands and Evolving Wilds and stuff like that, obviously. But we've also got, you know, Teachings of the Karen on turn 2 into this on turn 3. And with any luck, you might be able to flip her on turn 4 just from milling cards with Teachings. So that's kind of neat. And a bunch of other cards that mill in this environment. Plus, you've got things like Slowgurk and, you know, Soul of Windgrace. There's a ton of things that look like they're kind of forming a lands deck at which this is at the center. So, or of which this is at the center. Proper English. In any case, what does this meld into? Because I know you're waiting for it. Titania, Gaia Incarnate here, is a star legendary elemental avatar with vigilance, reach, trample, and haste. The questing beast amount of keywords on this thing. Titania, Gaia Incarnate's power and toughness are each equal to the number of lands that you control. It's a Wrenn and 7 token. When Titania enters the battlefield, return all land cards from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. You also pay 4 if you want to. It's 3 and a green to put 4 +1/+1 counters on target land you control. It becomes a 0/0 elemental creature token with haste. It's still a land. If you get this flipped on turn 5 and then play a Wrenn and 7, you have 2 like 9/9s or something. One of them has all the keyword abilities. Just seems dumb. Even if your opponent can kill the Titania at that point, you still ramp like a mad hatter. I mean, you can play like a Titan of Industry like immediately when you untap on the next turn. Like almost no matter what turn it is. You Titan of Industry and have mana left over. Storm the Festival out of your graveyard with the 10 mana you have now. It's just your card looks unbelievable. Does this go in Storm the Festival decks, actually? Now that because it can hit off of Storm the Festival, right? You can also hit Argoth off of Storm the Festival, which I think is cute. But man, that's what it is. I think we've stumbled into it, ladies and gentlemen. But altogether, you know, like I said, I see some people calling the card weak today, and I don't see that. I think that the card is in the kind of place where, like, you're not embarrassed playing it in 3-drop slot. And again, you're not synergizing too much to get it to flip. You're just playing cards you kind of play anyway. So, card looks pretty good. I want to try it. But now we're into the last couple of cards of the day here. That's how good we're getting at this point. But let's look at Teferi Temporal Pilgrim. There's 5 mana, 3 and 2 blue for a 4 loyalty legendary Teferi. And whenever you draw a card, put a loyalty counter on Teferi. That's quite the line of text. Now, you can pay 0 loyalty to draw a card, which is really like a +1, right? You can also -2 Teps to create a 2/2 blue spirit creature token with vigilance, and whenever you draw a card, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. You can also -12 teabag to have target opponent choose a permanent they control and return it to their hand, and then they shuffle each non-land permanent they control into its owner's library. I have seen people, I guess, lamenting this card a lot of the day, but I don't know, at this point I think people see it's a Teferi and they're like, boo, like no matter what. But the last couple of Teferis haven't been like that overpowered. We've seen a couple of 4-mana Teferis lately that have just been like kind of fine. They're just okay. Not overpowered. And I think this might go in that camp. It kind of reminds me of a Mordenkainen, probably because of the second ability, but Mordenkainen was an extra mana, but it did make creatures that were as big as the number of cards in your hand and not 2/2s that got bigger as you drew cards. But the 2/2 in question here, I think is actually pretty good. I wish this protected itself a little bit better. I've seen people online say this protects itself really well. I'm not seeing that. It just makes it 2/2, you know. That's not great. And a lot of times by the time you say go and let your opponent swing at you, it's still just going to be a 2/2. You won't have drawn a card. Where Teferi looks really good to me is when you do get to untap with them, when you have open mana with Teferi out. Then suddenly your opponent can swing into Teferi and you play like an instant speed thing that draws you cards. You know, like suddenly you play Silver Scrutiny or something like that. You know, it draws you a bunch of cards all at once, and then your opponent's combat math is messed up and stuff. That seems very, very good to me. It also seems nice, again, that appropriately Teferi needs time. It makes sense, right? With extra turns and stuff, not literally extra turns like time walking, but just with enough turns sitting there on the battlefield, you know, he goes from a 4 loyalty to a 5 loyalty the turn you play him if you draw a card. When you untap with him, if he hasn't been scathed, he's a 6 loyalty planeswalker. You draw a card, he's a 7 loyalty. So like he does tick up like really fast, and that's just normally drawing cards, not even casting spells or using other effects to draw cards aside from his own loyalty abilities. His loyalty gets up fast, you know, so there is that. And his ultimate's expensive, but again, it's every time you draw a card, he gets a loyalty, so they had to be careful with the ultimate. And I think the ultimate is basically you win the game, more or less, which is what a Planeswalker ultimate should be. I've seen a couple people, again, say the ultimate doesn't look that strong, but what? It's just, excuse me? The ultimate looks nuts though. So I think this is a strong Planeswalker that nonetheless is kneecapped a good bit by being 5 mana. 5 mana Planeswalkers can be playable. We've seen it plenty of times, right? And I'm not saying this isn't playable. I think it is playable, but I don't think it's as like nutso to butso as a lot of people seem to be thinking it is. The sky's not falling. It's a normal Planeswalker. He's fine. He's probably fine. You know, given enough turns, he probably wins the game by himself, but that's something we've seen out of Teferi enough at this point, right? One way or the other. This Teferi, I think, I'm going to put it on my tombstone, right? But I think this Teferi is probably fine, but good. Now, we're on our last card of the day, and you know it's going to be a banger considering some of the cards we've already looked at today. Just, jeez Louise. I mean, we got to see Mishra, Tamer of Mac and Cheese. We got to see Gix. Just a lot of... I honestly thought at first that some of these cards from today were kind of medium, you know, but the more I look at them, the more I think about them, the more I think they're probably actually pretty Ds. But probably one of the better cards in a vacuum today that doesn't need to be enabled. It's just a strong magic card, and there weren't a whole lot of those today. Is Phyrexian Flesh Gorger. This is 7 mana for a 7/5 artifact creature. It's a Phyrexian Worm. It's got Menace and Lifelink, and it's also got Ward. You pay life equal to its power. It's kind of crazy, but there's one more little bit of text on here, and that's Prototype. You may cast this spell with a different mana cost, color, and size. It keeps its abilities and types. So haha, yeah, it's another take on Kicker, but yeah, it works differently enough from Kicker that it's not Kicker. It's like a reverse Kicker, less a liquor. I don't know what you would call It doesn't make any sense. I don't know what you would call it, but still, I do love the concept, to be honest. I was going to say I really love the concept of this. Just big boys that you can play for less mana. I think it's going to affect limited a lot, but especially cards like this are going to affect standard. You do have the 7 mana to play this, and suddenly your opponent must deal with it, but to deal with it, they got to pay a price most of the time, unless they have a sweep or something, or sacrifice effect. So, just a good-looking card, even at 7 mana. But at 3 mana, it's kind of fine, too. They have to pay 3 life. Yeah, they have to pay 3 life to target this if you pay the 3 mana for it. And it's a menace lifelink 3/3. We're talking about, 3 mana 3/3s don't impress me, and there has to be a good stat line and, all that. There have to be... The creature has to do something, have keyword abilities and stuff. This is a 3 mana 3/3. 3 mana 3/3 menace and 2 keyword abilities and a ward ability that's actually difficult to pay, So that's, if we're talking about 3 mana 3/3s or just 3 mana creatures that Gix and Graveyard Trespasser compete with, this is way up there. But we're not even done. There's tricks with this, in case you didn't know, you can pay 3 mana for this. You can make it a 3/3 lifelink menace guy, right? And then you can just flicker it. You can play Touch the Spirit Realm. You can channel Touch the Spirit Realm. Flicker it, and suddenly 7/5 minutes lifelink. That's how these are going to work, man. That's so ridiculous. It's so crazy. Even just the ability to bounce these in the late game, right? I don't have a target for my Fading Hope, so end of turn. Fading Hope, my own guy. Yeah, I'll pay some whatever. Actually, I think ward is when your opponent's targeted, but yeah, it is. But yeah, I'll just have Fading Hope my own guy, and then pay him for pay 7 mana for him. I could picture that line happening from time to time is all. So just a neat little dude. Golden Argosy. Oh, are we finally going to get to see Argosy in Standard? That'd be nice. And Mishra. Mishra, the tamer of macaroni. He's also this is a great unearth target for that. You unearth this for 3 mana and suddenly you're swinging 7/5 menace, lifelink, haste, dies at end of turn. That's a hell of a ball lightning, So... Just man, I could see tons of different applications for this thing, obviously. I mean, yikes. Just mono black control, or mono black mid-range, whatever you want to call it. If you look at Ether Hub, if you believe it, has plunged about 15 percentage points in playability over the last couple of weeks since Meat Hook got banned. But this is the kind of card that could send it. Won't be the same mono black deck, but it'll send it right back up the charts, man. I want to play with this thing tomorrow. Although I'm not looking forward to saying Flesh Gorger for the next couple of years. That sounds super inappropriate, doesn't it? Flesh Gorger. But anyway, that's the cards from the first day. Good stuff. Again, I was a little nonplussed about these cards when I first read them when I woke up. There's new cards today? I thought they didn't start till the 28th. What are the new cards? Nah, these aren't great. The more I look at them, the more I'm okay, so it does this in this deck and it does that in the other deck. So yeah, it's making sense to me now, I think that there's a lot of hype about this set and a lot of hype today, period, man. Just a lot of legendary names finally given new versions of cards or versions of cards to begin with they never had. So just a lot of serious stuff today, and some of it looks standard playable. I told someone on Twitter earlier that I think about 3 of these cards look standard playable. But now I think it's more 1, 2, 3, 4. I mean, Titania counts as 1 card, but really she counts as 3 cards, right? So if you count her, that's 3 by herself. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, I think at least a 7 shoe-in standard playable from today, and that's half the cards from today. So really, the less jaded I look at it, the more I like the set, to be honest. It doesn't look too bad, and there's a lot more to come from it. So make sure you sub to the channel if you're not yet. There are going to be more spoilers. I can't talk. More previews tomorrow. And then more after that, the day after that. And I'll be here for every single one of them. I will be doing some weekend spoilers over on Twitch, so follow me on twitch.tv/SBMTGDev if you haven't done it yet, to know when you can get those spoilers live. It's a whole thing. It's a whole production. Not really. I'm sitting in a computer chair talking to chat about usually not Magic for 30 minutes, and then we talk about Magic. It's fun. We have fun. Follow me over there, or you can support my content on Patreon for just $1 a month at patreon.com/SBMTGD. The link in the description. It's SBMTG. on Patreon. That's all you got to do. But I'd really appreciate it doing any of those things. But if you're just here to hang out and chill on the couch and you don't even want to subscribe tomorrow, you're going to type my channel name in SBMTG. What's the spoilers? And you're just going to kind of, that's fine with me too. Just so long as you're here to watch, I'm happy. So appreciate you guys coming to chill with me on the couch for one. And again, if you want to see me do just some wild stuff, just some goofy stuff, just watch these videos. If you want to see something really, just, I don't even know why I did those videos. Silly. But anyway, I'm going to keep doing videos like that, just so you know. But I'm done for this one. I'm donezo for this one. Is that a catchphrase at this point? Close, but I'm out of things to say. Never. But in any case, I will catch you cats later. Just let me know how you felt about all these things down there in the comments section. And I see you later. Dev from the place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.